Side 7. Chapter 13. Julian has a surprise. The three children downstairs felt very sorry for George. Uncle Quentin had forbidden them to go up and see her. A little time for thinking out things all alone may do George good, he said.
Poor old George, said Julian. It's too bad, isn't it? I say, look at the snow.
The snow was falling very thickly. Julian went to the window and looked out.
I shall have to go and see that Timmy's kennel is all right, he said. We don't want the poor old fellow to be snowed up. I expect he's wondering what the snow is.
Timothy was certainly very puzzled to see everywhere covered with soft white stuff. He sat in his kennel and stared out at the falling flakes, his big brown eyes following them as they fell to the ground. He was puzzled and unhappy. Why was he living out here by himself in the cold? Why didn't George come to him? Didn't she love him any more? The big dog was very miserable as George. He was delighted to see Julian. He jumped up at the boy and licked his face. Good old Tim, said Julian. Are you all right? Let me sweep away some of this snow and swing your kennel round a bit so that no flakes fly inside. There, that's better. No, we're not going for a walk, old thing. Not now. The boy patted the dog and fussed him a bit, then went indoors. The others met him at the sitting-room door. Julian, Mr. Rowland is going out for a walk by himself. Aunt Fanny is lying down and Uncle Quentin is in his study. Can't we go up and see George? We were forbidden to, said Julian doubtfully. I know, said Dick, but I don't mind risking it for the sake of making George feel a bit happier. It must be so awful for her, lying up there all alone, knowing she can't see Tim for days. Well, let me go up, as I'm the eldest, said Julian. You two stay down here in the sitting-room and talk. Then Uncle Quentin will think we're all here. I'll slip up and see George for a few minutes. All right, said Dick. Give her our love and tell her we'll look after Timmy. Julian slipped quietly up the stairs. He opened George's door and crept inside. He shut the door and saw George sitting up in bed, looking at him in delight. Shh, said Julian. I'm not supposed to be here. Oh, Julian, said George joyfully. How good of you to come. I was so lonely. Come this side of the bed, then if anyone comes in suddenly, you can duck down and hide. Julian went to the other side of the bed. George began to pour out to him all that she had been thinking of. I believe Mr. Rowland is the thief. I really do, she said. I'm not saying that because I hate him, Julian. Really, I'm not. After all, I did find him snooping round the study one afternoon, and again in the middle of the night. He may have got to hear of my father's work and come to see if he could steal it. It was just lucky for him that we needed a tutor. I'm sure he stole those pages, and I'm sure he wanted Timmy out of the house so that he could do his stealing without Tim hearing him and growling. Oh, George, I don't think so, said Julian, who really could not approve of the idea of the tutor doing such a thing. It all sounds so far-fetched and unbelievable. Lots of unbelievable things happen, said George. Lots, and this is one of them. Well, if Mr. Rowland did steal the pages, they must be somewhere in the house, said Julian. He hasn't been out all day. They must be somewhere in his bedroom. Of course, said George, looking thrilled. Oh, I wish he'd go out. Then I'd search his room. George, you can't do things like that, said Julian, quite shocked. You simply don't know what things I can do if I really want to, said George, setting her mouth in a firm line. Oh, what's that noise? There was the bang of a door. Julian went cautiously to the window and peeped out. The snow had stopped falling for a time, and Mr. Rowland had taken the chance of going out. It's Mr. Rowland, said Julian. Oh, I could search his room now, if you'll keep watch at the window and tell me if he comes back, said George, throwing back the bedclothes at once. No, George, don't, said Julian.
Honestly and truly, it's awful to search somebody's room like that. And anyway, I dare say he's got the pages with him. He may even be going to give them to somebody." "I never thought of that," said George, and she looked at Julian with wide eyes. "Isn't that sickening? Of course he may be doing that. He knows those two artists at Kirin Farmhouse, for instance. They may be in the plot too." "Oh, George, don't be silly," said Julian. "You are making a mountain out of a molehill, talking of plots and goodness knows what. Anyone would think we were in the middle of a big adventure." "Well, I think we are," said George unexpectedly, and she looked rather solemn. "I sort of feel it all round me. A big adventure." Julian stared at his cousin thoughtfully. Could there possibly be anything in what she said? "Julian, will you do something for me?" said George. "Of course," said the boy at once. "Go out and follow Mr. Rowland," said George. "Don't let him see you. There's a white mackintosh in the hall cupboard. Put it on, and you won't be easily seen against the snow. Follow him, and see if he meets anyone, and gives them anything that looks like the pages of my father's book. You know those big pages he writes on. They're very large." "All right," said Julian, "but if I do, promise you won't go and search his room. You can't do things like that, George." "I can," said George, "but I won't if you'll just follow Mr. Rowland for me. I'm sure he's going to hand over what he has stolen to others who are in the plot. And I bet those others will be the two artists at Kirin Farmhouse that he pretended not to know." "You'll find you're quite wrong," said Julian, going to the door. "I'm sure I shan't be able to follow Mr. Rowland anyway. He's been gone 5 minutes now." "Yes, you will, silly. He'll have left his footmarks in the snow," said George. "And, oh, Julian, I quite forgot to tell you something else exciting. Oh, dear, there isn't time now. I'll tell you when you come back. If you can come up again then. It's about the secret way." "Really?" said Julian in delight. It had been a great disappointment to him that all their hunting and searching had come to nothing. "All right, I'll try and creep up again later. If I don't come, you'll know I can't, and you must wait till bedtime." He disappeared and shut the door quietly. He slipped downstairs, popped his head into the sitting-room, and whispered to the others that he was going out after the tutor. "Tell you why later," he said. He put the white mackintosh around him and went out into the garden. Snow was beginning to fall again, but not yet heavily enough to hide Mr. Rowland's deep footsteps. He had big Wellington boots on, and the footmarks showed up well in the 6-inch deep snow. The boy followed them quickly. The countryside was very wintry looking now. The sky was low and leaden, and he could see there was much more snow to come. He hurried on after Mr. Rowland, though he could not see a sign of the tutor. Down the lane and over the path that led across the common went the double row of footmarks. Julian stumbled on, his eyes glued to the footprints. Suddenly, he heard the sound of voices and stopped. A big gorse bush lay to the right, and the voices came from there. The boy went nearer to the bush. He heard his tutor's voice talking in low tones. He could not hear a word that was said. Whoever can he be talking to? He wondered. He crept up closer to the bush. There was a hollow space inside. Julian thought he could creep right into it, though it would be very prickly, and peer out of the other side. Carefully, the boy crept into the prickly hollow, where the branches were bare and brown. He parted the prickly branches slowly and cautiously, and to his amazement, he saw Mr. Rowland talking to the two artists from Kirin Farmhouse, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Wilton. So George was right. The tutor had met them, and, as Julian watched, Mr. Rowland handed over to Mr. Thomas a doubled-up sheaf of papers. "They look just like the pages from Uncle Quentin's book," said Julian to himself. "I say, this is mighty strange. It does begin to look like a plot, with Mr. Rowland at the centre of it." Mr. Thomas put the papers into the pocket of his overcoat.
The men muttered a few more words, which even Julian's sharp ears could not catch, and then parted. The artists went off towards Kirin farmhouse, and Mr. Rowland took the path back over the common. Julian crouched down in the hollow of the prickly gorse bush, hoping the tutor would not turn and see him. Luckily, he didn't. He went straight on and disappeared into the snow, which was now falling thickly. It was also beginning to get dark, and Julian, unable to see the path very clearly, hurried after Mr. Rowland, half afraid of being lost in the snowstorm. Mr. Rowland was not anxious to be out longer than he could help either. He almost ran back to Kirin Cottage. He came to the gate at last, and Julian watched him go into the house. He gave him a little time to take off his things, and then, giving Timothy a pat as he went by, he went to the garden door. He took off his mackintosh, changed his boots, and slipped into the sitting room before Mr. Rowland had come down from his bedroom. "What's happened?" asked Dick and Anne, seeing that Julian was in a great state of excitement. But he could not tell them, for just then Joanna came in to lay the tea. Much to Julian's disappointment, he could not say a word to the others all that evening, because one or other of the grown-ups was always in the room. Neither could he go up to see George. He could hardly wait to tell his news, but it was no good. He had to. "Is it still snowing, Aunt Fanny?" asked Anne. Her aunt went to the front door and looked out. The snow was piled high against the step. "Yes," she said when she came back, "it is snowing, fast and thickly. If it goes on like this, we shall be completely snowed up, as we were 2 winters ago. We couldn't get out of the house for 5 days then. The milkman couldn't get to us, nor the baker. Fortunately, we had plenty of tinned milk, and I can bake my own bread. You poor children, you will not be able to go out tomorrow. The snow will be too thick." "Will Kirin farmhouse be snowed up too?" asked Mr. Rowland. "Oh, yes, worse than we shall be," said Aunt Fanny. "But they won't mind. They have plenty of food there. They will be prisoners just as much and more as we shall." Julian wondered why Mr. Rowland had asked that question. Was he afraid that his friends would not be able to send those pages away by the post, or take them anywhere by bus or car? The boy felt certain this was the reason for the question. How he longed to be able to talk over everything with the others. "Oh, I'm tired," he said about 8 o'clock. "Let's go to bed." Dick and Anne stared at him in astonishment. Usually, as he was the eldest, he went to bed last of all. Tonight, he was actually asking to go. Julian winked quickly at them, and they backed him up at once. Dick yawned widely, and so did Anne. Their aunt put down the sewing she was doing. "You do sound tired," she said. "I think you'd better all go to bed." "Could I just go out and see if Timmy is all right?" asked Julian. His aunt nodded. The boy put on his rubber boots and coat and slipped out through the garden door into the yard. It was very deep in snow, too. Tim's kennel was half hidden in it. The dog had trampled a space in front of the kennel door and stood there, looking for Julian as he came out of the house. "Oh, poor old boy, out here in the snow all alone," said Julian. He patted the dog, and Timmy whined. He was asking to go back with the boy. "Oh, I wish I could take you back with me," said Julian. "Never mind, Timothy. I'll come and see you tomorrow." He went indoors again. The children said good night to their aunt and Mr. Rowland and went upstairs. "Undress quickly, put on dressing gowns, and meet in George's room," whispered Julian to the others. "Don't make a sound, or we'll have Aunt Fanny up. Quick now." In less than 3 minutes, the children were undressed and were sitting on George's bed. She was very pleased to see them. Anne slipped into bed with her because her feet were cold. "Julian, did you follow Mr. Rowland all right?" whispered George. "Why did he follow him?" asked Dick, who had been dying to know. Julian told them everything as quickly as he could. All that George suspected, and how he had followed the tutor, and what he had seen. When George heard how Julian had watched him giving a sheaf of papers to the two artists, her eyes gleamed angrily.
The thief! They must have been the lost pages. And to think my father has been so friendly to him. Oh, what can we do? Those men will get the papers away as quickly as they can, and the secret father has been working on for ages will be used by someone else, for some other country probably.
They can't get the papers away, said Julian. You've no idea how thick the snow is now, George. We shall be prisoners here for a few days if this snow goes on, and so will the people in Kirin farmhouse. If they want to hide the papers, they will have to hide them in the farmhouse.
Oh, if only we could get over there and hunt round.
Well, we can't, said Dick. That's quite certain. We'd be up to our necks in snow. The four children looked gloomily at one another. Dick and Anne could hardly believe that the jolly Mr. Rowland was a thief, a spy perhaps, trying to steal a valuable secret from a friendly scientist. And they couldn't stop it. We'd better tell your father, said Julian at last.
No, said Anne. He wouldn't believe it, would he, George?
He'd laugh at us and go straight and tell Mr. Rowland, said George. That would warn him, and he mustn't be warned. He mustn't know that we guess anything.
Shh! Aunt Fanny's coming, whispered Dick suddenly.
The boys slipped out of the room and into bed. Anne hopped across to her own little bed. All was peace and quiet when the children's aunt came into the bedroom. She said good night and tucked them up. As soon as she had gone down, the four children met together again in George's room. George, tell me now what you were going to say about the secret way, said Julian.
Oh, yes, said George.
Well, there may be nothing in my idea at all, but in the study downstairs there are 8 wooden panels over the mantelpiece, and the floor is of stone, and the room that faces east. A bit odd, isn't it? Just what the directions said. Is there a cupboard there, too? Asked Julian. No, but there is everything else, said George. And I was just wondering if by any chance the entrance to the secret way is in this house, not in the farmhouse. After all, they both belonged to my family at one time, you know. The people living in the farmhouse years ago must have known all about this cottage. Golly, George, suppose the entrance was here, said Dick. Wouldn't it be simply marvellous? Let's go straight down and look. Don't be silly, said Julian. Go down to the study when Uncle Quentin is there. I'd rather meet 20 lions than face Uncle, especially after what has happened. Well, we simply must find out if George's idea is right. We simply must, said Dick, forgetting to whisper. Shut up, you idiot, said Julian, giving him a punch. Do you want to bring the whole household up here? Sorry, said Dick, but, oh, golly, this is exciting. It's an adventure again. Just what I said, said George eagerly. Listen, shall we wait till midnight, then creep down to the study when everyone is asleep and try our luck? There may be nothing in my idea at all, but we'll have to find out now. I don't believe I could go to sleep till I've tried each one of those panels over the mantelpiece to see if something happens. Well, I know I can't sleep a wink either, said Dick. Listen, is that someone coming up? We'd better go. Come on, Julian. We'll meet in George's room at midnight and creep down and try out George's idea. The two boys went off to their own room. Neither of them could sleep a wink. Nor could George. She lay awake and went over and over in her mind all that had happened those holidays. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, she thought. I couldn't understand a lot of things at first, but now they are fitting together and making a picture. Anne was fast asleep. She had to be awakened at midnight. Come on, whispered Julian, shaking her. Don't you want to share in this adventure? Chapter 14. The Secret Way at Last. The 4 children crept downstairs through the dark and silent night. Nobody made a sound at all. They made their way to the study. George softly closed the door and then switched on the light. The children stared at the 8 panels over the mantelpiece. Yes, there were exactly 8, 4 in one row and 4 in the row above. Julian spread the linen roll out on the table and the children pored over it.
"The cross is in the middle of the 2nd panel in the top row," said Julian in a low voice. "I'll try pressing it. Watch, all of you."
He went to the fireplace. The others followed him, their hearts beating fast with excitement. Julian stood on tiptoe and began to press hard in the middle of the 2nd panel. Nothing happened.
"Press harder. Tap it," said Dick.
"I daren't make too much noise," said Julian, feeling all over the panel to see if there was any roughness that might tell of a hidden spring or lever. Suddenly, under his hands, the panel slid silently back, just as the one had done at Kirin farmhouse in the hall. The children stared at the space behind, thrilled.
"It's not big enough to get into," said George. "It can't be the entrance to the secret way."
Julian got out his torch from his dressing-gown pocket. He put it inside the opening and gave a low exclamation.
"There's a sort of handle here, with strong wire or something attached to it. I'll pull it and see what happens."
He pulled, but he was not strong enough to move the handle that seemed to be embedded in the wall. Dick put his hand in, and the 2 boys then pulled together.
"Oh, it's moving. It's giving way a bit," panted Julian. "Go on, Dick. Pull hard."
The handle suddenly came away from the wall, and behind it came thick wire, rusty and old. At the same time, a curious grating noise came from below the hearthrug in front of the fireplace, and Anne almost fell.
"Julian, something is moving under the rug," she said, frightened. "I felt it. Under the rug, quick."
The handle could not be pulled out any farther. The boys let go and looked down. To the right of the fireplace, under the rug, something had moved. There was no doubt of that. The rug sagged down instead of being flat and straight.
"A stone has moved in the floor," said Julian, his voice shaking with excitement. "This handle works a lever which is attached to this wire. Quick, pull up the rug and roll back the carpet."
With trembling hands, the children pulled back the rug and the carpet, and then stood staring at a very strange thing. A big flat stone laid in the floor had slid downwards, pulled in some manner by the wire attached to the handle hidden behind the panel. There was now a black space where the stone had been.
"Look at that,"
said George in a thrilling whisper.
"The entrance to the secret way."
"It's here, after all," said Julian.
"Let's go down," said Dick. "No," said Anne,
shivering at the thought of disappearing into the black hole. Julian flashed his torch into the black space. The stone had slid down and then sideways. Below was a space just big enough to take a man bending down. "I expect there's a passage or something leading from here under the house and out," said Julian. "Golly, I wonder where it leads to."
"We simply must find out," said George.
"Not now," said Dick. "It's dark and cold. I don't fancy going along the secret way at midnight. I don't mind just hopping down to see what it's like, but don't let's go along any passage till tomorrow."
"Uncle Quentin will be working here tomorrow," said Julian.
"He said he was going to sweep the snow away from the front door in the morning," said George. "We could slip into the study then. It's Saturday. There may be no lessons."
"All right," said Julian, who badly wanted to explore everything then and there. "But for goodness sake, let's have a look and see if there is a passage down there. At present, all we can see is a hole."
"I'll help you down," said Dick. So he gave his brother a hand, and the boy dropped lightly down into the black space, holding his torch. He gave a loud exclamation.
It's the entrance to the secret way, all right. There's a passage leading from here under the house. Awfully low and narrow, but I can see it's a passage. I do wonder where it leads to. He shivered. It was cold and damp down there. "Give me a hand up, Dick," he said. He was soon out of the hole and in the warm study again. The children looked at one another in the greatest joy and excitement. This was an adventure, a real adventure. It was a pity they couldn't go on with it now. "We'll try and take Timmy with us tomorrow," said George. "Oh, I say, how are we going to shut the entrance up?" "We can't leave the rug and carpet sagging over that hole," said Dick. "Nor can we leave the panel open." "We'll see if we can get the stone back," said Julian. He stood on tiptoe and felt about inside the panel. His hand closed on a kind of knob set deep in a stone. He pulled it, and at once the handle slid back, pulled by the wire. At the same time, the sunk stone glided to the surface of the floor again, making a slight grating sound as it did so. "Well, it's like magic," said Dick. "It really is. Fancy the mechanism working so smoothly after years of not being used. This is the most exciting thing I've ever seen." There was a noise in the bedroom above. The children stood still and listened. "It's Mr. Rowland," whispered Dick. "He's heard us. Quick, slip upstairs before he comes down." They switched out the light and opened the study door softly. Up the stairs they fled, as quietly as church mice, their hearts thumping so loudly that it seemed as if everyone in the house must hear the beat. The girls got safely to their rooms, and Dick was able to slip into his, but Julian was seen by Mr. Rowland as he came out of his room with a torch. "What are you doing, Julian?" asked the tutor in surprise. "Did you hear a noise downstairs? I thought I did." "Yes, I heard quite a lot of noise downstairs," said Julian truthfully. "But perhaps it's snow falling off the roof, landing with a plop in the ground, sir. Do you think that's it?" "I don't know," said the tutor doubtfully. "We'll go down and see." They went down, but of course there was nothing to be seen. Julian was glad they had been able to shut the panel and make the stone come back to its proper place again. Mr. Rowland was the very last person he wanted to tell his secret to. They went upstairs, and Julian slipped into his room. "Is it all right?" whispered Dick. "Yes," said Julian. "Don't let's talk. Mr. Rowland's awake, and I don't want him to suspect anything." The boys fell asleep. When they awoke in the morning, there was a completely white world outside. Snow covered everything, and covered it deeply. Timothy's kennel could not be seen, but there were footmarks round about it. George gave a squeal when she saw how deep the snow was. "Oh, poor Timothy! I'm going to get him in. I don't care what anyone says. I won't let him be buried in the snow." She dressed and tore downstairs. She went out to the kennel, floundering knee-deep in the snow, but there was no Timmy there. A loud bark from the kitchen made her jump. Joanna the cook knocked on the kitchen window. "It's all right. I couldn't bear the dog out there in the snow, so I fetched him in, poor thing. Your mother says I can have him in the kitchen, but you're not to come and see him." "Oh, good. Timmy's in the warmth," said George gladly. She yelled to Joanna, "Thanks awfully. You are kind." She went indoors and told the others. They were very glad. "And I've got a bit of news for you," said Dick. "Mr. Rowland is in bed with a bad cold, so there are to be no lessons today. Cheers!" "Golly, that is good news," said George, cheering up tremendously. "Timmy in the warm kitchen, and Mr. Rowland kept in bed. I do feel pleased." "We shall be able to explore the secret way safely now," said Julian. "Aunt Fanny is going to do something in the kitchen this morning with Joanna, and Uncle is going to tackle the snow. I vote we say we'll do lessons by ourselves in the sitting room, and then, when everything is safe, we'll explore the secret way." "But why must we do lessons?" asked George in dismay. "Because if we don't, silly, we'll have to help your father dig away the snow," said Julian.
So, to his uncle's surprise, Julian suggested that the 4 children should do lessons by themselves in the sitting room. "Well, I thought you'd like to come and help dig away the snow," said Uncle Quentin, "but perhaps you had better get on with your work." The children sat themselves down, as good as gold in the sitting room, their books before them. They heard Mr. Rowland coughing in his room. They heard their aunt go into the kitchen and talk to Joanna. They heard Timmy scratching at the kitchen door, then paws pattering down the passage. Then a big, inquiring nose came round the door, and there was old Timmy, looking anxiously for his beloved mistress. "Timmy!" squealed George, and ran to him. She flung her arms round his neck and hugged him. "You act as if you hadn't seen Tim for a year," said Julian. "It seems like a year," said George. "I say, there's my father digging away like mad. Can't we go to the study now? We ought to be safe for a good while." They left the sitting room and went to the study. Julian was soon pulling the handle behind the secret panel. George had already turned back the rug and the carpet. The stone slid downward and sideways. The secret way was open. "Come on," said Julian. "Hurry." He jumped down into the hole. Dick followed, then Anne, then George. Julian pushed them all into the narrow, low passage. Then he looked up. Perhaps he had better pull the carpet and rug over the hole, in case anyone came into the room and looked around. It took him a few seconds to do it. Then he bent down and joined the others in the passage. They were going to explore the secret way at last. Chapter 15. An exciting journey and hunt. Timothy had leapt down into the hole when George had jumped. He now ran ahead of the children, puzzled at their wanting to explore such a cold, dark place. Both Julian and Dick had torches, which threw broad beams before them. There was not much to be seen. The secret way under the old house was narrow and low, so that the children were forced to go in single file and to stoop almost double. It was a great relief to them when the passage became a little wider and the room a little higher. It was very tiring to stoop all the time. "Have you any idea where the secret way is going?" Dick asked Julian. "I mean, is it going towards the sea or away from it?" "Oh, not towards the sea," said Julian, who had a very good sense of direction. "As far as I can make out, the passage is going towards the common. Look at the walls. They are rather sandy in places, and we know that the common has sandy soil. I hope we shan't find that the passage has fallen in anywhere." They went on and on. The secret way was very straight, though occasionally it would round a rocky part in a curve. "Isn't it dark and cold?" said Anne, shivering. "I wish I'd put on a coat. How many miles have we come, Julian?" "Not even one, silly," said Julian. "Hullo, look here. The passage has fallen in a bit there." 2 bright torches shone in front of them, and the children saw that the sandy roof had fallen in. Julian kicked at the pile of sandy soil with his foot. "It's all right," he said. "We can force our way through easily. It isn't much of a fall, and it's mostly sand. I'll do a bit of kicking." After some trampling and kicking, the roof fall no longer blocked the way. There was now enough room for the children to climb over it, bending their heads low to avoid knocking them against the top of the passage. Julian shone his torch forward and saw that the way was clear. "The secret way is very wide just here," he said suddenly, and flashed his torch around to show the others. "It's been widened out to make a sort of little room," said George. "Look, there's a kind of bench at the back made out of the rock. I believe it's a resting place." George was right. It was very tiring to creep along the narrow passage for so long. The little wide place, with its rocky bench, made a very good resting place. The 4 tired children, cold but excited, huddled together on the funny seat and took a welcome rest. Timmy put his head on George's knee. He was delighted to be with her again. "Well, come on," said Julian after a few minutes. "I'm getting awfully cold. I do wonder where this passage comes out."
Julian, do you think it could come out at Kirin Farmhouse? Asked George suddenly. You know what Mrs. Sanders said, that there was a secret passage leading from the farmhouse somewhere? Well, this may be the one, and it leads to Kirin Cottage.
George, I believe you're right, said Julian. Yes, the two houses belonged to your family years ago, and in the old days there were often secret passages joining houses, so it's quite plain this secret way joins them up together. Why didn't I think of that before?
I say,
squealed Anne in a high, excited voice.
I say, I've thought of something too.
What? Asked everyone.
Well, if those two artists have got Uncle's papers, we may be able to get them away before the men can send them off by post or take them away themselves,
squeaked Anne, so thrilled with her idea that she could hardly get the words out quickly enough.
They're prisoners at the farmhouse because of the snow, just as we were at the cottage.
Anne, you're right, said Julian. Clever girl, said Dick.
I say, if we could get those papers again, how wonderful it would be,
said George. Timmy joined in the general excitement and jumped up and down in joy. Something had pleased the children, so he was pleased too. Come on, said Julian, taking Anne's hand. This is thrilling. If George is right, and this secret way comes out at Kirin Farmhouse somewhere, we'll somehow hunt through those men's rooms and find the papers.
You said that searching people's rooms was a shocking thing to do, said George.
Well, I didn't know then all I know now, said Julian. We're doing this for your father, and maybe for our country too, if his secret formula is valuable. We've got to set our wits to work now to outwit dangerous enemies.
Do you really think they are dangerous?
Asked Anne, rather afraid. Yes, I should think so, said Julian. But you needn't worry, Anne. You've got me and Dick and Tim to protect you.
I can protect her too, said George indignantly. You're fiercer than any boy I know, said Dick.
Come on, said Julian impatiently. I'm longing to get to the end of this passage. They all went on again, Anne following behind Julian and Dick behind George. Timmy ran up and down the line, squeezing by them whenever he wanted to. He thought it was a very peculiar way to spend a morning. Julian stopped suddenly after they had gone a good way.
What's up?
Asked Dick from the back.
Not another roof fall, I hope?
No, but I think we've come to the end of the passage, said Julian, thrilled. The others crowded as close to him as they could. The passage certainly had come to an end. There was a rocky wall in front of them, and set firmly in it were iron staples intended for footholds. These went up the wall, and when Julian turned his torch upwards, the children saw there was a square opening in the roof of the passage. We have to climb up this rocky wall now, said Julian. Go through that dark hole there, keep on climbing, and goodness knows where we'll come out. I'll go first. You wait here, everyone, and I'll come back and tell you what I've seen. The boy put his torch between his teeth and then pulled himself up by the iron staples set in the wall. He set his feet on them and then climbed up through the square, dark hole, feeling for the staples as he went. He went up for a good way. It was almost like going up a chimney shaft, he thought. It was cold and smelt musty. Suddenly, he came to a ledge, and he stepped onto it. He took his torch from his teeth and flashed it around him. There was a stone wall behind him, at the side of him, and stone above him. The black hole up which he had come yawned by his feet. Julian shone his torch in front of him, and a shock of surprise went through him.
End of Side 7.